Hello, Year 10 and Year 11, and welcome to this webinar. This is about evaluation. So first of all, we need to look at the purpose of evaluation and interpretation for GCSE English. We also want us to look at how to evaluate language and how to evaluate structure. So this is for a particular assignment. It's looking at War of the Worlds and looking at this statement. The writer brings the horror of the creature's appearance to life for the reader. It's as if you were there with the narrator. So this is designed to help you to attain a grade 5 at least, particularly for your teacher assessed grades, your centre assessed grades, because these are the kinds of skills that your teacher will be looking for you to achieve and to secure for GCSE English Language. First thing we need to think about, what is evaluation? What on earth does that mean? And here are some images to help us. This is a gavel. So you can see that this is used in a courtroom, a court of law. This is a toolbox. It says the writer's toolbox. These are speech marks. And this is a bank statement showing how rich or poor a company is. Now, how on earth do these help us with evaluation? Well, this is about you making a judgment. You, in an evaluation question, get to sit in the judge's seat. You decide whether something is wrong, something is right. It's as if you're saying this is guilty, this is innocent, you acquit it, or you admit it to jail. So you're using the gavel to make a judgment. You're making a decision. You're trying to be conclusive, to decide one way or another. Or even if you're in the middle, you're deciding that you're partly to blame, but you're partly relieved. You're making a judgment. The writer's toolkit was all about methods. So you, as well as making the judgment, you need to explain how you came to this judgment. And that's through similes and through metaphors and through adverbs and through flashback and through all sorts of different things. So evaluating is about having an interpretation. You decide what you think, but you're using subject terminology, similes, metaphors, adjectives, verbs to help you come to this judgment. You can't really write about a text without including quotation marks. So as well as using the subject terminology, you're including quotations, and then you refer back to the statement. Now, for this specific assignment, as we've said, the statement is this. Focus this part of your answer in the second half of the source. We're only going to read the second half of the source, line 19 to the end. Student, having read this section of the text, said, the writer brings the horror of the creature's appearance to life for the reader. It's as if you were there with the narrator. So as we're looking at the text, we're thinking, right, is this creature horrific? Does it look horrific? Does it fill us with dread and terror? Does it make us quiver right to our boots? Is it being brought to life? Do we feel as though we're standing right there next to the reader? So we're looking for all the clues that would help us to come to a judgment. Yes, this is correct. No, this is not correct. So I would suggest that there are 3 key kind of decisions that you can make. You can say, no, I completely disagree with the statement. The creature is not horrific. In fact, it's cute and cuddly. It couldn't be further away from horrific. We're not filled with disgust and terror. We're filled with compassion and sympathy. It's the kind of creature you want to tuck under your arm and give a big cuddle. So you could say, I strongly disagree with the statement, and this is why, and you give your evidence. They've used this metaphor that shows this as a cute, cuddly creature. They've used this alliteration, and obviously the creature is not terrifying, doesn't fill us with horror at all. And we don't feel as if we're there with the narrator. We're quite distant. We don't see it from the narrator's point of view. We see it from the crowd's point of view. We see it from the creature's point of view. You might strongly disagree, completely disagree with the statement. However, you might fully agree with the statement. You would say, of course, this is right. I'm making this judgment. I completely agree with the statement. The creature's appearance is disgusting. It's horrific. It's uglier than ugly. And as if I feel as if I'm there with the narrator. The narrator makes me feel as if I know how he's feeling and and I'm really living through him vicariously, reliving the experience. Yes, I fully agree. However, the third position that you might have is that you partly agree. Actually, some of this is horrific. It looks really terrifying, but some of it is not. So I partly agree. And because this is a text you've never seen before, you're not exactly sure what the writer's doing, partly agree is a quite safe position to have, because you can see on the one hand, the creature's appearance is a bit horrific, but the other hand, there's not so much horror here, it's something else. So evaluation is about determining, judging, assessing, working out if there's worth or value, significance or quality in this statement. You're judging, yes, this statement is true, is partly true, or is not true. So it's really important that you remember that it's all about evidence. You couldn't acquit someone, you couldn't put someone into jail without evidence. You have to say these are the 3 things that make this person guilty. And the same for this evaluation question. You're going to say these are the 3, 4, 5, 6 things that make this creature's appearance horrific and make me feel as if I'm there with the narrator. See, how is this statement shown to be true? How is this statement shown to be false? You're thinking about your evidence. Now, when you're, in a nutshell, when you're thinking about this, you have to be evaluative. Now, English is a subject that causes a lot of debate because we have critical perspectives. It's like a painting. You might look at a picture and think that is wonderful and that means this, whereas someone else will look at it and say that's terrible, but it means something else. We have a different critical viewpoint, and that's great because there are all sorts of texts that have been debated for centuries. People can't agree about how they see things, and that's wonderful. It's about interpretation. So you will have an evaluative viewpoint. You have your own viewpoint. You interpret it a particular way, but you have to remember to use subject terminology and carefully chosen quotations as you refer back to the statement. Now, this is quite a full packed PowerPoint, but it's just reminding you about subject terminology. You might look for prepositions and adjectives and complex sentences and exaggeration, which are the language features, but you might also look at the structure features. So you might look at flashback or foreshadowing. You might look at disequilibrium and how problems are introduced, rising action. You might talk about the narrative perspective and the use of contrast and juxtaposition. You might talk about shifts, how things shift, and you might talk about sentences. So you might talk about language, you might talk about structure, and you're evaluating whether or not that statement is true or false. Let's look at the actual source. Let's read the source through and look at what kind of structure features, what kind of language features can we look at to evaluate whether it's true, the statement is true or false. The statement's there on the right hand side just to remind you about it. And this is the extract. A big, grayish, rounded bulk, the size perhaps of a bear, was rising slowly and painfully out of the cylinder. It bulged up and caught the light. It glistened like wet leather. 2 large, dark-coloured eyes were regarding me steadfastly. The mass that framed them, the head of the thing, was rounded and had, one might say, a face. There was a mouth under the eyes, the lipless brim of which quivered and panted and dropped saliva. The whole creature heaved and pulsated convulsively. A lank tentacular appendage gripped the edge of the cylinder, another swaying in the air. Those who have never seen a living Martian can scarcely imagine the strange horror of its appearance. The peculiar V-shaped mouth with its pointed upper lip, the absence of brow ridges, the absence of a chin beneath the wedge-like lower lip, the incessant quivering of this mouth, the Gorgon group of tentacles, the tumultuous breathing of the lungs in a strange atmosphere, the evident heaviness and painfulness of movement due to the greater gravitational energy of the Earth. Above all, the extraordinary intensity of the immense eyes were at once vital, immense, intense, inhuman, crippled, and monstrous. There was something fungoid in the oily brown skin, something in the clumsy deliberation of the tedious movements unspeakably nasty. Even at this first encounter, this first glimpse, I was overcome with disgust and dread. Suddenly the monster vanished. It had toppled over the brim of the cylinder and fallen into the pit with a thud, like the fall of a great mass of leather. I heard it give a peculiar, thick cry, and forthwith another of these creatures appeared darkly in the deep shadow of the aperture. I turned and, running madly, made for the first group of trees, perhaps 100 yards away, but I ran slantingly, stumbling, for I could not avert my eyes from these things. Now, as we see this passage, it's clear that there is a great deal of horror. The speaker even uses the word horror, so we can say that it must be partly true. But it talks about the grey roundish bulk, the size of a bear, rising slowly and painfully from this cylinder. So this adverb, painfully, could suggest that this monster, that it's called, is injured and suffering. So perhaps the appearance isn't horrific, it's injured. Because it's an extraterrestrial, not used to being on Earth, somehow it's suffering because, as it says there, the greater gravitational energy of the Earth is having an impact on its body. It also says that it glistened like wet leather. This is a language feature. It's a tactile image. It's almost something that makes us imagine how touching something wet and leathery, hard and slippery. However, wet leather is not particularly horrific. It's not a gory image. It's not full of blood. It doesn't have teeth that are gnashing. So perhaps we can say we partly agree, because wet leather, although it's tactile and unpleasant, it's not particularly horrific. Then we go to the face of the creature, the mouth that's slathering with saliva, that's quivering and panting. So although it's animalistic, panting and quivering, it's more like a dog than really any kind of other predator. And then it talks about how the creature is heaving and pulsating. And again, it's horrific. But again, it could be that it's breathing heavily because it's not used to Earth. So we could be partly agree, because there's quite a few elements of language, the adverb, the verbs, and the list, and the animalistic language, that makes us think that this thing is in pain and injured rather than being predatorial, being a predator. The second paragraph talks more closely. Now we can think about the structure features here. This is a huge long list. It doesn't have ands. It doesn't have and. It's a huge long list with commas. So it's an asyndetic list, or an asyndeton, that's used to show that the writer, the narrator, is feeling completely overwhelmed. You've got the lips, you've got the brows, you've got the tentacles, you've got the movements, all of the eyes, all of this is overwhelming. And the list, that breathless list, you can barely breathe in between and pause, is a structural feature, shows he's feeling overwhelmed. However, the thing is quivering and breathing. It's not actually coming towards him. So the appearance looks monstrous, but at that time, it doesn't seem to be attacking him. So again, is it horrific to look at? Yes. But is it actually threatening him? It looks threatening. There is an element of threat, but it's not coming closer. Now, when we look at the third paragraph, there's a shift. This is a structural feature. Suddenly the creature vanished and toppled. So this verb and this shift, it's a language feature and a structure feature. It's almost comical. It comes and it makes this thud, this onomatopoeia. It falls like a big suitcase into the pit. However, this perhaps is more sinister. This perhaps is more horrific, that when it cries, another creature immediately emerges from the aperture, from the opening. And it says forthwith, again, this adverb, and darkly gives that sense that something sinister is being multiplied. So this is perhaps more horrific the multiplication, then the appearance of the creature. And then we've got the end, this breathless panic, stumbling and slanting, this use of sibilants to show that it's, again, breathlessness, trying to remove himself from the situation. So you could see that some of the language features are adverbs and verbs. You can see that the use of this idea, the gorgon and the tentacles, some of these nouns, this idea of ugliness and threat, monster, are really helping us to have a sense of horror. But you can also see that the structure features, the language, the list, the asyndetic list, the asyndeton, is that sense that he just is overwhelmed and breathless. And actually the creature perhaps is more helpless and injured than it is threatening. So it's up to you. This is English. It's about interpretation. You might think, actually, yes, this is horrific. The appearance is horrific. Or you might say, no, it's not horrific. It's obviously injured. It's an extraterrestrial. It's an alien. It's coming to the earth. It's obviously not going to be very good at moving. It's obviously not going to look like humans. Or you might be partly agree. You might decided that part of it is horrific to look at, but the other part seems to be an injured creature. And actually, perhaps the horror is the fact that it seems to be able to multiply itself, or the fact that there's more than one of it in the capsule, in the cylinder. So let's have a look before you have a go at this assignment of an example. Now, in this example, I've tried to show you a candidate that's using all 4 of these assessment criteria: the gavel, the toolbox, the quote marks, and the reference, the statement sheet. So they're giving views, their interpretation of what this creature is like. They're using subject terminology, they're choosing quotations and referring back to the statement. You can see I've tried to color code it to help you see a sample response. I fully agree with the statement because the alien pod is represented as vividly horrific because of the use of a convincing first-person narrator who is disgusted and threatened by the experience that he powerfully recounts. Firstly, the writer obviously shows the narrator's disgust of the creature's appearance through adjectives like peculiar, incessant, tumultuous, and strange. This suggests that the figure is inconceivably abhorrent. The particular use of the present participle verb, the incessant quivering of the mouth, conveys to the reader that this is obviously predatory, probably preparing to gobble and swallow the humans. This sense of threat seems to be further demonstrated in the metaphor Gorgon group of tentacles, which the horror of the slimy and lethal Medusa head is shown as if we are there with the narrator. This means that the statement is true because it's almost as if the writer has intertwined the science fiction fear of Martians with an ancient, fearful, mythical beast, the Gorgon, intensifying a sense of horror for readers. So this candidate agrees with the statement and they're trying to give their evidence about why. So you can see their viewpoint. They think it's horrific. They think it's disgusting. They think it's threatening. They think it's abhorrent. It's predatory. It's preparing to gobble people up. It's lethal, like the Medusa. It's ancient, like the Medusa. But we've got the science fiction that the writer is using, the kind of fear of the unknown and science, and that is their interpretation. But they've used subject terminology. They've talked about the first person narrator, they've talked about adjectives, the participle verb, present participle verb, and the metaphor. And they've used quotations. They've used a range of quotations, and then they've referred back to the statement at the beginning. They referred back to the statement about the appearance. They've talked about the horror. They've talked about the narrator. They've talked about the statement and the horror again. So referring back to the statement. And you can see why this is a good candidate, that they're using all 4 elements to really use evaluation and really evaluate the statement and give their viewpoint. They're writing about language and they're writing about structure. Okay, I hope that this has helped you to give you confidence that you, like this candidate, can secure a grade 5 for your evaluation. You know that you're giving your viewpoint, you're agreeing or disagreeing or partly agreeing with the statement. You're using methodology, so you're using subject terminology to talk about the different methods. You are using quotations and explaining the quotations and referring back to the statement. So I would like you to have a go at this assignment, pause the webinar, use the sentence stems to really write in detail. And then once you've done that, use the mark scheme to decide which level candidate you are. Are you level 1? You've made some really basic, simple comments. Are you level 2, that you've written bits of things that are relevant? Are you level 3, that you've been consistently clear? Are you level 4, that you're detailed and perceptive throughout? I hope that's helped you with your evaluation. Thank you for joining me.